if we just allow our minds to go onto autopilot, it's not surprising that we have a mental health crisis out there, because it's almost like we run a 12 to 14 hour high intensity workout on our mind 7 days a week without any recovery.
People are afraid to face the reality of what it's going to expose.
The alternative of doing nothing, we know where that road ends. It's a mess.
Before we jump into this episode, I'd love to invite you to be a part of the community where you can listen to more content to help you be a smarter, stronger, and better equipped, successful leader. All you have to do is hit that subscribe button. I would love and appreciate your support. It's amazing to me to watch the community grow and read all of your comments each and every week. I can't wait to go on the journey with you. Thank you so much, and it means the world to me. Today, I am joined by Marc Champagne. Marc and I've actually known Marc for years now. He has not known me, but that's okay. We'll get into that. Marc is a best-selling author. He is a podcast host, keynote speaker, and mental fitness strategist who helps corporate teams and individuals enhance their mental well-being. He has a podcast, Behind the Human, where he's interviewed over 350. I think he's climbed more than that now. Such amazing people as Kobe Bryant, Maya Angelou, Coco Chanel, Stephen Hawking, on and on and on. Marc trains people to ask better questions, like in his book, Personal Socrates, which I thoroughly enjoyed a couple of years ago. Our mutual friend, Joey Cafone, published that amazing piece of work. Marc, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, the honor is mine, Tyler. Thank you. I can't wait to start jamming.
So I have to first, I mentioned Joey, but I have to give a nod to Chris Shembra, who went the extra step further to connect us. So thankful for him, grateful for him, right? That's very fitting for Chris.
I was going to say it is.
Yeah.
And it's pretty wild. I mean, Chris, you mentioned the book, but kind of putting this all together. I mean, Joey obviously published the book, and as a dear friend, Chris is in the book. And I mean, it's a funny small world when it comes to when you find, I guess how I can describe it is when you find your tribe, right?
Yeah.
And things just start to happen, which is nice.
Well, I think you mentioned this. It's like when you find people that match energy. And, whatever that is, whether it is through gratitude, whether it's through connectedness, whether it's through curiosity. But before we get too deep into that, the question I must start with, Marc, who are you?
Oh, no, I knew this was going to come.
For those of you that maybe haven't listened to Marc's podcast, that's how he starts. I thought it would be most appropriate to do so.
I appreciate that. Who am I? I'll say, who am I today? Because I do believe that answer evolves. I mean, of course, there are some fundamental, I think, traits and characteristics that, at least for me, hang on as I've evolved. But there is some evolution there as we all learn and so forth. So for me right now, I mean, what resonates most is just I'm a curious human that does everything possible to slow the external noise and tap into, as much as I can, I'm human like the rest of us, is tap into the present moment to actually hear what's happening. Because there's so many beautiful cues and messages and guidance within ourselves and others, of course, but we typically just don't see or hear or feel them. So I've really made it my mission. And frankly, this really started when I published the book, because before that, I would say I would have answered that question a little bit differently, in the sense that, I was trying to make a business work and an app work and so forth, and chasing numbers and whatnot. And when and we can get into that if it's appropriate, but when all that stuff kind of came tumbling down and I was focused on the book launch, I remember journaling about this, thinking, I'm just going to do the best I can. I don't care what numbers show up. And my job in situations actually like what we're doing right now is just to show up as present as possible, to see where the path may go. And that's it.
I take a deep sigh and breath, and my producer, Alex, who's listening in, can probably say that, yeah, I've heard Tyler say those things, but I wasn't like that before. And I look at what I'm doing now, it's very much to be that. I mean, my word last year was be. And, this
Oh,
year it's
yeah.
aware. And I think, if I could sit here and say at 44, the ability to stop and sense that and not chase, man, that's what a lot of us people around us don't have. And why do you think that is?
Well, because I don't think we're not surrounded by that. I think that's the biggest component because
Give
even
more words to
myself,
that. Like, we're not surrounded by what?
we're not surrounded by an environment that promotes stillness.
I mean,
And
we're in the hustle culture.
we're in the hustle culture, and it's not just hustle culture, but we're in the content culture. I mean, we're obviously a part of some of that, but I mean, it's just constant. It's nonstop. So if we just allow our minds to go onto autopilot, it's not surprising that we have a mental health crisis out there because it's just we're not designed and made up biologically to handle the amount of pressure and content and decisions and stresses. It's just not, it's not possible. It's almost like because I talk a lot about mental fitness, but obviously the link is, or the parallel is physical fitness. And it's almost like we run a 12 to 14 hour high intensity workout on our mind 7 days a week without any recovery. I mean, just think about the physical. If we did that physically, we're toast. And we do it though over and over again with our minds, and we don't realize it. Or then we get to these points where, oh, why does my back hurt? Or I feel like I need a massage, or my neck is starting to kink. And those are just the early warning signs. Then, and we all know you hit these bigger walls and so forth. And I think it's, kind of coming back to the original question, it's because we've normalized this way of living in a way. Because, and this is selfishly, because I just, from the people that I interview, I would say 100% of either whether I've interviewed them or studied them for the book, they all take time for stilling their mind and prioritizing that time to think and reflect and so forth. So, and I'm not perfect. I mean, if I think we're recording this on a Friday, this morning was one of the first times this week where I really felt like I was able to slow down, and I'm looking at my desk. I have my notebook and journal open, and it was, okay, here's what happened this week, and here's where I went a little off the rails with the mind and stuff like that. But I think the old me would have not done the Friday, and I think we just need to be kind to ourselves because we know these things, right? So it's just like, okay, this week was a little bit heavier than normal, and there's some things that happen that force the mind into some, some spins and so forth. That's okay. Here I am. I'm taking some time to think about it and process it. And guess what? Next week is going to be a little bit better because of that, right?
I mean, there's a relation to that. I was that way last Friday. My wife was out of town, and she was coming back home, and she was texting me early in the morning. She was on the East Coast, I'm on the West Coast, and I had to tell her and my daughter, who are both texting me, ask me things like, "I just need some time. Like, give me some space." And unfortunately, they might have took that I was upset, and I was like, "No, I just understand. I'm at that brink." And I think part of what you mentioned earlier, you look down and you recognize that. Man, what I've had to condition myself, what I hear from you is you've conditioned yourself to recognize that, as opposed to it's just another day. I got to plow forward because, man, I got things to accomplish, and this is the path forward. I just got to keep pushing, because too many people in our society say you are failing unless that's what you're doing.
Yeah. Well, and this is where the mental training or the mental fitness comes in, right? Again, just like physical fitness, if we're constantly training our body, we stay ready for situations, right? I was at the chiropractor yesterday, actually, and she always asks, did you take any falls? Because we're just coming out of snowboard season where I live. I mean, it feels like it's an eternity ago because there's no snow anymore. But I said, well, actually, yeah, I took a really hard fall in a long time, like embarrassingly caught an edge, bam, down. To the point where I winded myself, got to the bottom of the hill. I'm like, okay, I think everything's moving okay. It's probably just my ego that's been bruised. And she said, what is interesting is that when and she's probably just selling her services as well, but she's like, when your spine is healthy and when your body is healthy, you can take impacts like that. And I thought because, there was a time where I wasn't as healthy like that. And I've taken falls, and the smallest falls, next thing you know, like you break your wrist or something, or like something's thrown out of whack. And it just made me think, that's the physical example, but on the mental side, when our minds are healthy, or our baseline is at least above the norm in terms of what's going on out there, then we can take those hits, right? Those moments where they're high pressure or high stress situations, or like we're forced into, not forced, but we're triggered into a survival mode. We can recognize this. Oh, there it is. Okay. And I've got tools for it. I don't have to stay in that mental torture. And it was just, I just found it was an interesting parallel I hadn't thought about before, as I was getting my back cracked.
Well, take us back, myself and the rest of the audience, is like, you've had this great, revelation, right? This great understanding. You mentioned it based upon today, but even going back to, your book launch and the app, I would say failure, but learning lesson. That's how I look at those things. Take us back and help myself and the audience understand what brought Marc to this point, first and foremost. What brought you either in the pursuit of, philosophy, or just wondering in that curiosity that you have today?
It goes back even further than the app and the book and all of that. And it started when I was in the corporate space in sales. And what was happening, I was hired essentially almost straight out of university. And at that time, anyone that remember these moments, used to be hired in these batches essentially.
Yeah.
And you'd be in big groups, and you'd be trained up by the company and so forth. And I remember thinking, and that was my case. I was flown out to Montreal, which is where the Canadian office was, and spent a couple weeks in training. And like, this is a sales function. Now, we're all being given the same thing to sell with the same features to talk about. And now you're training us up with the same sales skills and models and things like that, and selling methods. How possibly am I going to stand out from this group and win the incentives and make the bonuses, like all the regular sales kind of things, right? And for whatever reason, what came to mind was, I'm just going to get up 10 minutes earlier in the morning and read positive content. So I started doing that. And this is where the revelation really kicked in, because I feel like it took not even weeks, but days to come to the realization that at that time, I'm reading blogs and biographies and things like that. It didn't matter who I was studying. 100% of them were asking powerful, reflective questions. So I would write down the question that they're, however it was left in the text, I'd write it in my notebook, and then I would journal on that question based on, what was going on in my life, personally and professionally. And then just did that for years, literally a decade. And I was experimenting. I didn't know Bear and Fig at this time, so I wasn't using their notebooks, and I was using digital solutions actually at that time as well, which I say solutions, but there kind of were no solutions. There was word processors, and eventually Apple Notes came out and so forth. And I just grew really frustrated with the lack of tools that were out there for a practice that we know as journaling that wasn't modernized, or wasn't being discussed in a modern way. Like meditation was really starting to come to the forefront with Headspace and Calm and so forth. So set out to create an app to do that. And that's what we've kind of been chatting around, which was Kyo, which is the Japanese word for today. So that's how it all started. And then everything kind of catapulted from that moment on. And it became this work around mental fitness and journaling and reflection, and so forth, went from these are the tools that I've noticed that people are using and that have worked really well for me, to it has to be my mission to at least provide access and perspective and awareness to what's possible. Because anyone watching, or I'm not sitting here with beads and a robe on a 7-day silent retreat, and nothing against that. Those are fantastic. I'm just a regular human that,
Yeah.
like many of you, that we all have or recognize that we all have these opportunities to train our minds to work for us instead of against us, essentially.
So let's go to from that experience, what you learned. Let's dig down and maybe people listening and watching can relate to is why don't people do it? Why don't leaders in today's corporate space and in every avenue of that, why don't they do exactly what you talked about, journaling, writing those questions, taking time to think?
That's it's a really straightforward but very good question. And my mind's trying to simplify the answer because I think it's a bit complicated. What comes to mind intuitively for people that aren't doing it is that they haven't yet found a compelling enough role model or use case or scenario to say, oh, I should probably take a look at this as well. Because when it comes to journaling it's literally been around since the beginning of time, so I'm not inventing this stuff. But for me, it started to show up around, there was a use case, right? I want to be the best sales rep as possible. And I'm going to start learning from other people. And oh, interesting, they're doing this. So that's one element. Now, some leaders might say, yeah, I've heard people talk about it and so forth, which is probably the case. I don't have time, right? And I don't, the only thing I can say to that is bullshit. Like, I don't know,
Well, I think that the note that I wrote down from as you were saying that is, there's not enough reason to do it. And people are motivated by desperation or inspiration. And what
yeah,
I
well said.
distilling from this, and as we're having this conversation, is you were inspired to do it because you wanted to accomplish something. And, for people that journal or see the value in it, it's, oh, I want to accomplish something different. Or, I've picked it up over time. For example, I have picked it up over time. I have a daily practice that I've picked up over time, and it's now essential as part of my day. And I look back, I'm like, oh my goodness, what would a day like be without it?
Well, so that's the key.
I also know what it feels like when I don't do it. And it's frantic and it's like, oh, this is a hot mess. It's days when, my kids are like, they got to go somewhere or whatever else. It's just like, oh, I can feel my day is just off. You reflected on understanding your Friday, those mental cues where you've picked it up. And yet, what I don't think enough people talk about, as you and I are talking about this, is to slow down allows you to go faster. And yet everyone thinks, hey, to go faster, you just got to push harder. Wake up at 5 a.m, 4 a.m, 3 a.m, and go until 10 o'clock at night and then do it all over again. That's the only way to accomplish.
Yeah. But this is where, and again, coming back, like this is the environment that we're surrounded with. So I think our jobs as people that are speaking about different use cases and doing our best to get this stuff out there, that's where we've got to come in and remind. I say remind because people know this, but we need the constant reminders of, oh yeah, I could probably leverage, and I'm saying journaling because that's my kind of core, but breath work, meditation, just like physical fitness, just because you don't like running doesn't rule out exercise, right? There's a million different things. The key is that, and this was the hinge part that I wanted to come back to, the alternative of doing nothing, we know where that road ends, and there's good data to support, and we just have to turn on the TV, unfortunately, and see it's a mess. When I work with teams, the vast majority, well over 50%, are mentally unfit. And I don't say that from a place of judgment. I say that from of course, because if you're not doing anything, it's just you turn the news on, it's fear. You fire up your email, you're inundated with an endless amount of things to do and respond to. So we have to give ourselves the tools. We owe ourselves to give ourselves the tools because I'm of the believer, forget all the science around productivity and ideation and retention. Sure, all of that. When you're healthy, of course, you're gonna see those numbers. But I think just as general humans, we deserve to wake up feeling energized and happy more days than not. Not every day, let's be realistic, but I think more days than not. And it's the reverse right now, right? People are lonely, people are depressed, people are anxious. And it doesn't have to be like that. I'm not, diminishing that there's a lot of stuff going on in the world, of course. But there's always been a lot of stuff going on in the world. And this is where when you have this is where the mental fitness comes. I mean, I typically have a book leaning against the coffee machine, and usually it's something from Ryan Holiday, some sort of stoicism situation going on that as the coffee's brewing, I'm just reading a couple pages because then you start to realize, oh, 1,000 years ago, they're kind of saying the same thing that we're talking about right now in terms of the stresses. Different time period, but oh well, they did these things, and that's how they got by. Well, why don't I try that? And it's just, I think the biggest thing, Tyler, is that we just try because we're surrounded by this all the time. We try to overcomplicate things all the time, just like you kind of alluded to. If let's just say you don't have any mental fitness, be like, we see all the routines and whatnot, like, okay, tomorrow I'm going to get up at 5 o'clock. I'm going to do some breath work. I'm going to fire open the journal. I'm going to drink my water. I'm going to throw some electrolytes in there. I'm going to exercise and take a cold shower. And it's like, great. I'm sure that'll work. But if you're going from 0 to that, I mean, your chances of being consistent are quite low. So, just start maybe with 2 minutes of some guided breath work. That's my
James Clear,
go-to.
famous 2 minutes, right? You just start with 2 minutes.
Well, and here's the thing with stuff like that. I mean, because, and you and I are kind of in this space. So I do have a routine kind of like the first one, but it's been well over 12, 15 years of developing it. But as you know, as a dad, when those little mini humans throw you off, they don't sleep, or they, and it throws off mom and dad's sleep. Well, I probably can't do that whole routine. But instead of just doing nothing, which then you start the day feeling like you're playing catch up right away, I am 100% doing a minute, 2 or 3 minutes of guided breath work. And then just that alone, forget even the physical benefits, the mental benefit of, wow, it feels like I started my day on my own terms, even though I didn't get a full night's sleep or whatever the situation was, right? And that's the micro shift, the micro perspective shift that we all have. There's nothing special with me. We all have access to that.
The thing that's spinning in my head, and we talk, going back to the first question, kind of hinging on or whatever, is why don't people do it? And you talk about your evolution and your growth. It's that over time developing. It's either, it's too much. That for, I think, a lot of people is, I don't have time, right? It's too much. I don't want to have to go through the experience to figure out what's going to work for me in my day and deliver results. Here's the other belief I have. People are afraid to face the reality of what it's going to expose. People are afraid to acknowledge their fears and insecurities and be vulnerable and authentic with themselves, because that's going to dig up some, past or some wounds, or even make it to where, I got to go a lot deeper because this created, a bigger concern than what it is just kind of like, I need to be more productive.
Yeah. But here's the thing. You're going to have to deal with that at one point, and it's either you deal with it when you hit the wall, or you start on your own terms in some capacity, because there's no way around it. Whether it's past trauma, whether it's a question that I often journal on is, what am I pretending not to know? And usually those are the things kind of in the back corner of.
Give me an example of that. What are you pretending not to know?
That, okay, most recently that a business relationship and partnership on in the works is better than what it actually is, and that leads to, well, why am I pretending that the reality is something different? I hear all the signs of, I don't think this is going to work out. It's probably time to move on, but for some reason I'm trying to salvage something. right? Um, and there's the kind of case in point. Either I can deal with that now, or I keep wasting a bunch of time and energy and effort and money and all of that, and then eventually it's just going to explode into something, probably unmanageable or bigger. Or just do the hard thing now of accepting that it's just, and accepting from a place of non-judgment. I think that's the other big thing, is just tried something, didn't work. It's okay. Let's move on. Same thing with just relationships in general. That this is the big one that you see all the time, personally and professionally. Sometimes people are just meant to be in your life a certain period of time, and we can be grateful for that, both sides. But we've evolved, and maybe we've evolved in different ways. My wife and I joke about this, or kind of laugh tongue in cheek, because we both look at, there was the corporate version of our marriage, and then there's the entrepreneur version of our marriage. And we said, wow, we're lucky we evolved together, because I can see how that would have been a big problem if, you were still here and I'm over here now. And not that anyone's better than the other, but we're different people.
If you don't grow together, you grow apart, and
correct,
that growth is painful, right?
Yeah.
Your kids are just getting to the age in the next few years where they're going to start seeing growing pains, right? And as my kids experience growing pains, it made me realize that you don't grow without pain. And you have to embrace that. And I think, and often, whether it's relationships, you talk about business relation, personal relationship, how much do we try to avoid that pain? I came up with this a couple years ago, and it just is hitting me as we're talking about this. And you bring up do I want to address this business relationship? And to me, that's a barrier of inactivity. We're just like, if I don't do it, it's okay. Other barriers that I find, and this is in leadership, but self-leadership, are insensitivity. And you kind of alluded to that as well. It's like, I just don't care what's going on. I'll just keep going. When we relent to those barriers, then we seal ourselves off. And I think that comes back to the next, as we've discussed this, why don't we ask questions, or who is asking questions? It's the curious that you mentioned. It's like, I'm willing to find any answer because I'm excited about where it's going to take me. Whereas the flip side of that is, I don't want to ask any question. I don't know the exact answer, because it could lead me to a place that I'm ill-equipped, and all of a sudden my vulnerability, my fears go through the roof.
Yeah, for sure. But I mean, this is where it always comes back down to some sort of emotion of fear, right? So if we have the tools in place to help regulate fear, then all of a sudden we recognize it comes up, and like, okay, for me, a lot of that's breath work, and now it's gone. And now I immediately have a mental reset. And then you can start coming back to those questions. I remember when I first started speaking with teams, I kind of took the approach of just straight up keynote. And I was like, okay, here's the stuff that I'm learning. I'll share the backstory and whatnot, which was interesting. But then I was like, that doesn't work for this kind of work. So what I now do is, there's an element of kind of show and tell situation, but the vast majority is we're going to breathe together. We're going to check in as a group together, because now you're going to feel it, right? Or we're going to go through, and I've mentioned this to Chris, I use his gratitude prompt often if we're doing a gratitude flow, right? And we're going to feel that together. Like, you're going to text that person and wish them a good day right now, kind of thing. The point was, the difference I noticed in those two styles of working with teams is, the first one was, then I'd ask them questions and I'd get surface level responses. The second version of having activated and gone through some of the practices felt like groups were 5 steps deeper, just from calming their minds and so forth. So the link that maybe it's a bad example, or it's definitely a long example. Maybe Alex can edit some of that down. But the point is, we can ask questions like, what am I pretending not to know? Or what's the next logical step forward, in a state of fear loops and survival modes and so forth, and being activated in that sense. Or take a minute to process those emotions and so forth. And then all of a sudden you get a whole much wider range of solutions, which shows up in the business world as well. And this is what I mean by the leaders that when they say I don't have time. The example that always comes to mind, and I think I wrote about this in the book, Naveen Jain, billionaire, kind of multiple times over, multiple companies. And I'll never forget when he shared his I said, Naveen, or I asked him, I said, how do you make just real clear, good decisions? And he said, he's like, I have to make these big business decisions often. He's like, the team will come to me with spreadsheets and PowerPoints and all the data and whatnot. But the thing that he does and he's learned to do is take that all in, but then I ask everyone to leave and I need to take 15 minutes where he says, I close my eyes, I project myself 6 months forward, having made that decision, and let that sit. Does anything intuitively feel off in that new scenario 6 months from now? And he told me, he said, there's been times where I've said, yeah, there's something off. We can't do the deal. And it makes no sense based on the PowerPoints and data. But he's like, it saved millions of dollars. So whenever someone says, especially a leader saying, I don't have time, well, I'm sure you would have time to save millions of dollars.
Yeah.
That's 15 minutes.
Well, I mean,
right?
To me, when people use the excuse of time, it's the same as like, well, money. It's like, no, we can go out and buy the next iPhone. iPhone 16 comes out or whatever tech there is, whether it's the latest Whoop or whatever it may be, we make the money available. And if it matters enough, we'll make the time available. And as you've iterated, and as I've heard from people, is we don't have the time or we're not going to devote the resources to that. And it's often because we don't believe it'll actually work because we're too busy looking right here instead of that 6 months in the future. And that's when everything matters.
Yeah, totally.
And what I heard from you is the only way to possibly get there is by asking the right questions and then thinking about them.
Yeah, because if we're not asking questions, we're just on autopilot following. And I mean, not that there's, that's not the end of the world, but it's not a very fun existence to just not think about anything, right? There's certain things that I'd love to be, I'd love that, the airplane I'm on has a really good autopilot system, but if there's something starts to go wrong, I want the pilot to be able to handle the situation, right? But we're often on autopilot the majority of the days, and it's no surprise then you get to this point where, and you hear this all the time, where 10 years goes by and it's like, how did I get here?
Yeah.
Well,
yeah,
you got here from a series of decisions and actions, right? That, like James Clear often says, like it's just those micro changes in the habits, and I would say the questions that we're asking that can put us back on track. But we have to figure out, I mean, if I had to wrap all of this up before or summarize, we have to first understand, who am I today, which you already asked me, and who am I striving to become?
Yeah.
Right? And at least have that clear, because then that dictates, well, if I'm striving to become this person and show up like this individual and want to feel like this, well, these are the edits that I need to make. Or as things come up, like I see you're wearing a Whoop, right? It's gives us great sleep data and all of that. If we know where we want to be, and all of a sudden, we have some sort of situation that's going to consistently disrupt our sleep. Well, that's not going to get us to that place of performance or whatever that is, right? So it's just having the data and making the course corrections along the way and checking in with ourselves.
Yeah. Well, and I think, as you mentioned there, it's being willing to experiment. That's what I think about as you share that. I've had a Whoop for just over 7 years now. So a long time.
Okay.
And there's been a lot of experimentation and willing to experiment. And my background in nutrition and coming from, that's normal to me. For a lot of people, that's not normal. We talk about you creating the routine you have, and it's a bit of an experimentation. And then you also realize what I have days for, what I don't. And I think we have to curate in our own world an environment to embrace that. Or at the same point, if we're serving others, leading others, whether that's in the middle or the top, the bottom, whatever, is to curate that same type of environment, because only then will we find the innovative next answer. Because if we continue to try to be too rigid, too static, then we end up keep doing the same things we're doing. And like you mentioned, 10 years later, we're like, how do we get here? This is not where I want to be, but you just blindly continue to plow forward.
Yeah. Well, and I think it comes back. It's a great point, and then to be really blunt on it, it's what if you're not where you want to be, then what you're doing is not working. So, and I put myself in that camp too. It's like, okay, well, so what? I've got to change something, or I'm just going to continue to repeat this cycle. So let's experiment. And again, I'll try to keep hammering this point from a place of not judging ourselves, because that's what gets us really stuck in these loops, right? You get stuck in these stories and like, why did I do this? It's data. It's just data, just like a business. You got the scorecard, you have the market research. All right, we have the best data of the time right now. How can I make the best decision based on this? And we can do the same thing with our minds and our lives and our work and our journeys, all of that stuff.
We've taken this time thus far to be very intrinsic, very internally focused. I want to kind of use the same framework and the methodology and the practices to say, how much does this being internally focused, figuring out what helps us, asking the questions, journaling, all those things, how have you seen, either through your experience or what do you see that converts into higher emotional intelligence, better able to be empathetic with others, as opposed to not taking the time to think and journal and create those routines?
Well, not so. What's coming up top of mind, because it's this happened quite quick. I had Kristen Holmes, the VP of Science and Performance from
Yeah, I
Loop
listened to that.
on my show. Yeah, so I mean, just for your listeners, this data blew me away. But when we think of, and I'll come back to the journaling, but when we think of sleep, just because sleep is the thing that I feel most struggle with, and something that we all have to do, and also I can give as many mental fitness routines as humanly possible. If you're not sleeping well, it's like you're swimming upstream, essentially. And what Kristen shared when it comes to external facing and how, in this case, our sleep, or if we have, I think that the exact, don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure if people that have sleep debt, they're behind on their sleep of 45 minutes or more. So it's not that much. The data that they have and the studies that they're running it has shown that affects the psychological safety of others around you, right? So now that changes everything in my opinion, because typically, and I was the same, it's like, I'm not, my sleep is me. I'm going to be low energy. I'm going to be struggling through. But now that's affecting people around you and your team, which is affecting performance and results and all of that kind of stuff, right? So, I'll come off the data side of things, but just speaking in common sense, if we individually show up and aren't checking in with ourselves and have a bunch of emotion and are in a state of fear or anxiety loops, how possibly can we see what others aren't telling us, or how they're feeling, or hold space for others? It's nearly impossible, right? We can barely show up for ourselves. So it has to start with us. It's just the classic airline example. You have to put your oxygen mask on first before helping others. And then once you do that, you feel it. When someone's, and yourself when you're in a state of flow and like things are just happening and it feels good. You're having a great day. People are calling, your conversations are better. It's infectious, and there's an energy towards that. And that's what I'm talking about around. I think we all deserve more of those days than not. And if we can do that together, I mean, it's just a beautiful ripple effect.
Often the challenge internally is, can we make those associations? Can we make the association, whatever's affecting my sleep is affecting those around me, whether I work with, my family, whatever else? And the only way to get there is you got to stop and think about it and evaluate and saying, all right, what didn't allow me to get the sleep? Or am I tired? Am I whatever? What's causing that? Is that something in my control? And man, what happened today? Are those two connected? Or is it, well, Mark was just having a bad day, whatever. I just got to keep on rolling. It's like, were you inferring he had a bad day? Were you able to say, hey, Mark, what's going on? Like those chances, I think, of empathy. And again, it comes back to the same solution. If we're not stopping to think about it and evaluate it and taking that time, because we keep just foot on the pedal, we got to go, 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 because so many large prominent figures in society say that's the only way for, prowess, and that's the only way to success. That's the only way to really make your mark. I think you just leave carnage. I think you just destroy yourself and other people for this facade that's what life is really about.
Yeah, well, and it just doesn't work. I mean, the thing is
that
we
point
have
too. I mean, okay.
we have the thing is what's crazy to me the more that I die, because you introduced me as a mental fitness strategist, which is true. I don't consider myself a coach, or I'm definitely don't play a therapist on the internet or anything like that. I'm trained to be a strategist, and in strategy, especially in the business world, we check in, right? Like there are business reviews for a reason. There are, okay, well, let's see, is the marketing plan working? Is the sales plan working? We check in and we gather data. So there's the weekly statuses. Let's take a look. What projects are up on deck? What do we need to do? What's the focus? Well, take a look at those meetings and tack on nothing crazy. Doesn't have to be an additional hour, but even, because I say this because I'm getting asked to do these now. Do 5 or 10 minutes, come onto a status, and let's check in. How do you feel today? One word, just put it in the chat. Typically, those chats are overwhelmed, stressed, burnt out, scared. Like it's usually always an emotion related to their minds are full in some capacity. And when they're not, usually someone's lying. And then I'll call them out and say, are you sure? Because there's a lot going on. I'm listening to the status here. It seems to be a lot happening. Like, let's just acknowledge it. Coming back to like, what am I pretending not to know? Because that emotion, whether you ask the question or not, is coming into the day with you, and it affects everything, right? So let's just take a moment, for me, and that's during that coffee ritual. It's like, how do I feel today? Well, if I feel a little off, well, why do I feel like that? Cut the fuel source, right? And then read some of Ryan Holiday's stuff. And it's like, this is a 5-minute routine that just absolutely affects the next 24 hours, including how well or poorly I'm going to sleep, right? And it doesn't take much. So same thing in a business setting. We just need to check in with ourselves and our teams and see, well, realistically, what's the pulse? What's going on? Because when I work with people outside of doing the keynotes, and I run these forums, essentially, these circles, and just provide a confidential space for people to check in. And I'll never forget, I did one recently with a team that has a 97% retention rate. I mean, I've never seen that high of a retention rate in the company. But the group that I was with, I set it up. I said, okay, over the last 30 days, what's been your biggest mental challenge? And then also, what have you overcome? Half of the group was in tears within minutes. They're sharing, going through massive fertility challenges. I have a best friend that's severely depressed that I'm trying to figure out what to do. And like this, whether you're asking these questions, this stuff is happening. And we're lying to ourselves if we don't think that affects how that person is showing up at work, whether that's performance or just being, there for other people and so forth. So let's just stop pretending that this isn't happening. Same thing with everything that's happening in the outside world. Just acknowledge it from a place of non-judgment, and let's put some plans together. Let's put some strategies together for our minds and for our teams, and everyone wins.
Well, as you share that, I think about the people that either haven't done that work on themselves to be able to recognize the value of it, or are fearful of going there because of what it might expose. and whether they feel ill-equipped or not to understand, hey, Mark, this is necessary. Can you come and do this? And thank you for doing it, because it absolutely is impactful. And I think that's where it's not new. I think we can go back to the early, philosophers and Stoics all the way through the millennia since. And there's been this constant, it's got to be about the people. It's got to be about the people. It's got to be about the people. But often we get enamored by the technical. And now we're back to the place where it's about the people. And it's like, well, let's actually be vulnerable and admit and do the work about the people, which you just said, which will show up long term. And maybe I'm able and equipped to do that. Maybe I'm not. And that's okay. But that takes, again, a level of vulnerability in not being afraid, Mark comes in and he's better at this. Then all of a sudden, I'm out of my position. It's like, no, you still have value. It's just accept that. It just, to me, is summarizing, looking that experience and how valuable it is and how much that is a part of our business world and a requirement for leaders, whether you're leading yourself or leading others. Because if you don't do it, like you said earlier, you're going to hit a wall, and then there's going to be destruction for yourself and others.
For sure. And the line I use as well with, because I'm getting to the point, honestly, Tyler, right now that, and I do this in a really polite Canadian way, of course, but it's like, as soon as a mind stops working, so does your brand. And what's happening is that's happening, but then also that minds are working 50%. So is your brand. So like we just have to be, and it's just, you think about it from a common sense. There's a ton of data that you can pull up to support all of that, but like, let's just forget all of that. It's just, we're humans. Let's just talk human to human. Does that make sense? And yeah, it does. Like, we're humans with emotions. So let's, and there are tools. That's the thing.
To kind of, finish with an element of, all right, what do we go and do? Like, what process? We've talked about a lot of processes. We've talked about routine. We've talked about asking questions. We've talked about being vulnerable, having those moments. Like, what process do you recommend to teams and individuals to craft these questions, to get through the mental clutter and actually, all right, this is what I do to lead to greater clarity and focus?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's essentially one question that comes to mind that can kind of start it all off. And it's just, if you think of the practices or exercise or routines, rituals, whatever you want to call these things, what are 3 to 5 things that if you do these things, you put your mind in a happy, positive, thriving state, or a calm and peaceful state, right? And everyone's different. There are of course, consistencies and overlapping things. Like, for me, probably can guess journaling, breath work, getting outside. Nature always wins, right? But just go through that question and identify what works for you. Because now it's not me saying, hey, go and do 3 minutes of breath work. You know what works for you. And then the next part in that equation is, okay, well, if these are the things, how often are you doing them each week, right? And okay, maybe it's 0, no judgment, but let's look at the calendar. And this is what I'm about to do for Friday, is take a look. Okay, here's what's going on next week. There's a couple days I already know that are pretty heavy. So let's make sure I inject, a walk after lunch or something like that, or a bit of breath work, like something, right? Just, if we can be proactive with this stuff, then we get into this realm of preventative mental fitness, and we don't get to the end of the week feeling completely burnt out, right? So identify your practices, see where you can fit them in. We're about to, I don't know when this is going to release, so I'll leave dates out of this, but pick a timestamp for yourself that's attainable. The next month, take a look at what you want to achieve over the next month, personally and professionally. Like, if you closed your eyes and you got to the end of the month and you were celebrating something, what is that? Who's there? How do you feel? And so forth. Now that you know that, well, then what are some of the recovery practices and the mental fitness practices or the things that you just listed, circle one non-negotiable that is the thing that will help you get to that destination. And it doesn't have to be more complicated than that because, and you know this, but as you start doing this kind of work, you start to expand. And the next thing you know, you'd be like, oh, I'm going to try that little check-in thing in the morning. The next thing you know, the check-in just happens naturally. It's like 2 o'clock in the afternoon. You're like, oof, I'm feeling a bit strange. Like, what's going on? And you're not even thinking about it, but you're noticing because your self-awareness is starting to boost because you're training your mind to do that, right? And then it just expands. It's the most beautiful kind of ripple effect possible because you start trying all these different things, and then you feel better, and it just keeps looping in a positive way.
It's great. 3 to 5 things that put you at ease.
What's your main non-negotiable for you personally?
Oh, I mean, what it's gotten to be, I get up and I read a devotion, person of faith. So I read Proverbs every day. I've done that this week, 300 weeks in a row. I spend time, personal Socrates was part of my morning reading. I read for 15 minutes. I have a back massager I put on. It gives me 15 minutes. Right now, I'm reading about Teddy Roosevelt and William Taft. I just got done reading Nelson Mandela. So that's part of my morning. And then I work out. I'm in a season right now. I have cows that are at a place. I no longer have cows because they have now become steaks. And so I am in that season. But that to me, it's so funny. We opened this up. You hopped on Riverside, which the platform we record with. And I was talking to Alex, producer, about landscaping. You're talking landscaping. Yes, I still do that. Yes, I could hire somebody to mow. But you know what? Me getting out and doing that, as much as it's daunting sometimes, it's very cathartic for me. And we can say that, oh, I'll hire somebody to do all those things. Really? Are you going to go out and get your hands dirty and ground yourself, whether that's mentally or physically? Probably not. So yeah, it's something I got to do. And I don't mind it. But here's the other thing that whether we realize it or not, and your kids are younger than mine are 17, almost 16 and 15. Is 14. If I'm not doing those things and they actively see it every day, that's not going to be impressed upon them. And then they're going to have to search even deeper, farther, and wonder, as opposed to, yes, let me walk you through why this routine is so important that I work out every day. So I can be healthy. So that way, when you want to go do things, I can do things with you. That I need to read because I got to flush my mind of being too intense or, distracted. And so I'm excited and curious to learn about historical figures and learning that the challenges they went through in life are no different than what we're going through. And those things are important and constantly willing to tweak and say, all right, what's serving me? What's not serving me?
I love it. I think, that's as you said, my kids are a bit younger, 2 and 7, but I often think, I'm sure you've gone this and probably continue to go through this, but it's like certain situations come up and you're like, oh gosh, that's, they're going to have to unpack that at one point in their lives. But I often think as parents, if I feel like our job is done if we can just equip them with the tools, because then it doesn't matter what the situation is. But if they feel like, okay, yeah, I know if I exercise, like this is going to have, if I read or if I've got journaling practice or something, like I can deal with the stuff that's going to be thrown my way. Right.
When I was in college, I wrote this quote. And I was reminded this morning as I was preparing for this, I was listening to one of your podcasts. I think it was with Justin McLeod. And you talked about, adversity. And I wrote the quote, the rewards of childhood are not seen by the child, but the adult that grows from that child.
Oh, wow. You wrote that?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And I continue to live that and the adversity, the struggle, the traumatic stuff that I had are why I'm doing what I'm doing. But you come back to that. If we embrace those moments, man, we're going to be rewarded not today, but tomorrow and years from now. And if we circumvent those things and bury them and try not to deal with them, it's just going to fester and it's going to, like you said earlier, it's going to lead to destruction. So,
yeah. Oh, beautiful words. Beautiful.
Marc, where can people learn more about you and your work?
The easiest place, everything links out from here, is just behindthehuman.com, which is also the name of the podcast, but my work is there, and the socials, I'm accessible, probably most active on LinkedIn. I mean, the podcast shows up on Instagram, but just shoot me a message because I'm always interested to learn about the questions that have really changed your life or made a huge impact, because then we can share those out. And I've seen it happen over and over again. There are people on the other side that, one question makes all the difference for them. So let's share and let's help as many people as possible together.
Well, thank you so much for your time. And thank you to all of our viewers and listeners. Remember to subscribe on YouTube and wherever you listen to podcasts. By rating and reviewing each episode, you can help more people find impactful leaders like Marc. Until next time, choose to lead with impact.